Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Suits and Laterals. I'm your host for the evening, Jeff Rich. Uh, Lots of good football this weekend. We're going to talk about some of the games coming up, but first we're going to talk about a pretty sore subject for yours truly. I'm going to let Chris Green kind of introduce this, and first of all, Chris Green, how are you doing today?
I'm doing quite well, Jeff. How are you?
Doing all right. I'm doing all right. It's a pretty patriotic week in the household. It was I previously served in the Marine Corps, and it was on November 10th every year. It's Marine Corps birthday. The day after is Veterans Day, so it's a pretty patriotic time. I'm sure that everybody's seen it on social media or in whatever recreational activities they take on during this second or third week in November.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for your service. I mean, my grandfather and several of my uncles were also in the service at one time as well. So we appreciate all of you fine service men and women out there who have helped protect the country and give us the life that we have today.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of appreciation, I'm going to tell you, there's something that's been kind of eating up the NFL news cycle that I don't appreciate. Chris, you know what that is. Why don't we get started?
Yeah, so it was late last week. I believe it was Deadspin, if I'm not mistaken, released some photos from the Greg Hardy incident last year. For all of you who aren't familiar, Greg Hardy, who is with the Dallas Cowboys now, had some sort of a domestic incident with his former girlfriend. He was eventually suspended by the NFL, but the NFL Players Association appealed it and got the suspension reduced from 10 games down to 4. So anyway, going back to that, some photos were released that showed the actual bruises and marks on the girlfriend of the alleged beating. So I mean, I don't know how you felt about it. I'm assuming you felt much the way I was, pretty appalled by it. Uh, and I don't know. What did you think when you saw that come out, Jeff?
Well, I'm disgusted, but I've been disgusted for a long time with Mr. Hardy. He was going into a free agent year with the Carolina Panthers, got put on the commissioner's exempt list. So, I mean, this is all old stuff. This goes back to 2014. This goes back to before we saw the Ray Rice video and before the commissioner of the National Football League had to specify a domestic abuse penalty of 6 games. This comes in the aftermath of the outrage over Ray Rice only being suspended for 2 games, especially after we all witnessed the video of him, slugging Janae Rice, who was his fiance, who is actually now his wife, which is Ray Rice's thing. I think that we've put that a little bit behind us. We've been able to move on from that, but Greg Hardy continues to be a menace. Even up to this day. We're recording on Wednesday. Jason Garrett had to counsel him about his Twitter profile, which stated that he was innocent until proven guilty, and there was a lot of misinformation out there. And it was just something that was unacceptable. Um, but what it all comes down to is he's on the field right now because the NFL's hands are tied, and they don't really have a way to keep him off the field. The only, you and Damien alluded to it in previous podcasts, that short of owner collusion, which is illegal, that there's nothing. The guy went to court and won. Like you said, he had a 10-game suspension. It was taken down to a 4-game suspension, and it is what it is. Because what did they ultimately say, that it fell under the morals clause that was previously written for the likes of Chris Henry and Pac-Man Jones.
Yeah, I mean, they pretty much what they said is, this was under the previous CBA and it didn't apply to these new penalties, so it isn't right that you're mandating this longer suspension against him because it's not. This wasn't part of any clause that was in there. It's really a technicality that he got off on, is what it amounts to. But I guess my question to you is, and we'll get into the legal part of this in a second, but at some point, do the Players Association Do they have to walk away from these things?
I, I talked to some union reps this week to get a basic understanding of what the union's role is, and if you do unilaterally support, or if you're able to walk away from a bad egg, so to speak. And what I was told was the union's role is to enforce the contract. Now the contract is negotiated by the likes of Upshaw when he was alive, and now DeMaurice Smith, to work with the league to get a contract that the players are comfortable with. And it took us a while to get there a couple of years ago. What was it? The 2011 draft was held during an NFL lockout, and players couldn't be traded. Only draft picks could be traded. So we went through that lockout. We didn't miss any games because of it, unless you count the exhibition that takes place down there in Canton, Ohio, the Hall of Fame game, which is the way too early preseason game played in the NFL. But we didn't really miss anything significant that season, other than hamstringing the teams at the draft by not allowing them to move players, and the legality of the draft was even questioned then. But getting back to it, the collective bargaining agreement is all about doing something that is mutually agreeable by the owners and the players. And the lockout was mostly about money, not necessarily clauses like this, but. So the union has an obligation to protect that, to enforce the contract. And since Greg Hardy, it's not a technicality, it's literally the contract. And since Greg Hardy is protected by the contract, the union has an obligation to him, not because they want to see Greg Hardy get on the field, but because they want this contract to be binding, and they want it to protect the players that they like. And they can't just pick and choose arbitrarily who they like. And that's why Greg Hardy ends up getting union protection. And that's why the NFLPA is going to go to bat, and for anybody that commits atrocities like him in the future. Now, in the future, they're going to be subject to the domestic violence clause, which is going to cost you 6 games, but it's still not going to cost you 10 games. I mean, you think that it's what, 10 years before before we go to another contract, or 7 or 8 now that that we have a few years behind us, since the last one was negotiated in the last lockout, quite frankly. This is something that I think the players are going to have to give in on. I think that it's going to have to be a 16-game suspension, or a remainder of the season suspension. What are your thoughts on 6 games? It's better than 2, but it's not as bad as 16 or expulsion from the league.
Well, I think I don't know. I mean, I think there's every situation should have. I mean, I understand you have to have a baseline point, which is what the 6 game is. No, I don't agree it's enough. I think for something like that, you should make a statement and say you're out for the year. I mean, there's plenty of minor infractions that they have these penalties for. I mean, that you could consider, whether you consider them stupid or not, with regards to uniforms or recreational drugs or whatever. Because, I mean, in all honesty, there's players that have been busted for recreational drug use that are spending more time suspended than players that are involved in these type of incidents.
I mean, they are repeat offenses, and there is a pretty black and white substance abuse policy in place in the CBA. So, what's fair is fair, and this is something that the players agreed to. So this, the substance abuse guys, it seems like it's a lot less heinous than Greg Hardy's incident, especially now that we've seen it in our face. I mean, we could guess what happens when a smaller woman gets thrown onto a couch covered in automatic weapons. We could imagine, we could draw our own conclusions from that. But when it's in your face, man, it's the truth. It's just the truth. It's just reality smacking you right across the jaw there. I got to go back to Ray Rice for a second, because one of the atrocities by Roger Goodell, and one of the ways that I see that the league completely fumbled this case, was that he was suspended for 2 games, and then and then the video gets released, and it wasn't like Ray Rice committed another crime because the videos got released. It wasn't like there was anything in the video that was a huge surprise, other than just the shock factor in seeing it, rather than just talking about it. And I think that we meet somewhere in the middle of what the imagination tells us and what the video reveals when we see still photos. Because we still haven't seen video. There is no video of Greg Hardy. We've seen still photos of this. So do you think that maybe it's while it's a big deal, it's less of a big deal because we're not seeing the incident taking place. We're only seeing the aftermath here, Chris.
Um, no, I don't think it's any less of a big deal. I mean, I think it's always been a big deal. I guess my point on this is, uh, I understand that the Players Association has an obligation to protect him, and but I mean, what does this say to the other players out there? I guess, and what does it say to the NFL? I mean, they want to penalize these guys, and they want them to have proper behavior or just behavior in general. But at what point is enough enough? I mean, contract or not?
I mean, you're gonna be stuck. I mean, that's what it comes down to. The way that I look at this is that the punishment's already been handed out. He already served the penalty that the court said was the maximum the NFL could hand down. So everything that punitive that's happened to Greg Hardy has already happened. Now you have to look at this guy, how unapologetic he is about everything, and you have to assume this is going to happen again. You hope that it doesn't. You hope that it doesn't, but you're going to have to assume that there's going to be some repeat offenses here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I said the same thing to Damien a couple weeks ago. I mean, at this point, the commissioner's just the only thing he can do is wait for him to do something else. Because I mean, like you said, he's kind of flaunting it out there, and to be honest, I think the Cowboys are enabling him at this point. I mean, they may say a few things here, but when they start talking about him being a leader on the team, and then he continues to do this stuff, whether it's blowing up at the coaches on the sidelines or making ridiculous comments to the press or its Twitter profile, whatever, any of those things. I mean, this all just adds up to tell you, number one, that the guy doesn't get it, and number two, he just doesn't care, and he's not going to change no matter what. I mean, that's the one thing I've heard about this whole situation is he has shown zero contrition at this at all.
Right. Right, and what this doesn't have in common, this has something in common with one incident, and that's Adrian Peterson with the Minnesota Vikings, who we found out about between weeks 1 and 2 of the 2014 season. But Jonathan Dwyer, Ray Rice, these guys were released by their teams pretty much upon the news of this, and then after the fact, he's signed by the Cowboys. The pictures come out now. Would we be condemning the Cowboys? Would we be condemning Jerry Jones and Jason Garrett if they only released him after the photos came out? Because you can kind of guess. I mean, that's kind of what the Ravens did. You can guess what happened, but do you think that because of the PR hit that they might have taken, would the Cowboys have been in a better position had they just seen those photos and released Ray Rice? More specifically, seen those photos hit the public eye.
Yeah, I mean, they committed to the guy. I mean, I give them credit for at least sticking by him at this point. I think there's been this denial from them saying they've never seen him. I just find that hard to believe since the NFL's seen him and the NFL Players Association have obviously seen these, how they hadn't. That's what I find laughable about it. I mean, if they're going to take the guy and stand beside him, then they might, at this point, their bed's drawn. But that doesn't mean they have to give him a contract extension next year. I mean, they can just let him go at the end of the season. But they've been out there talking the last few weeks. Well, we want to sign him, and he's one of our leaders. That's the bigger issues, I think, or the problem.
So the smart money says that's going to happen?
What's that? The contract extension?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it will. As long let me preface that. As long as he plays well for them the rest of the year, he'll get a contract extension. If he falls the way and just doesn't do anything, then maybe they let him go. I think that's the bigger issue with Ray Rice, is that he was on the kind of the downside of his career. He hadn't been playing that well. If he had actually been playing at a higher level, I almost guarantee you he'd be with another team right now.
Well, and you have to think that it goes beyond this year, because if If you look where the Cowboys are right now, they're 2-6. They were 2-5 going into their game with Philadelphia on Sunday night. The season, whether they want to admit it or not, the season's over. I don't care how bad the NFC East is right now. The season is over for the Dallas Cowboys. Unless Tony Romo is going to come back and go 7-0, it's just not going to happen. So, I look at this as Greg Hardy's not just a this year thing. That they do plan on having him for the foreseeable future. They've got Tampa Bay this week. They've got Tampa Bay this weekend. Jameis Winston's been improving, but this Dallas pass rush, with or without Hardy, seems to be pretty formidable. You look at this game, the Buccaneers are on their way up, but and they're playing at home. But can Dallas get off the slide they're on? With an easier opponent in Tampa Bay.
I think they can. I mean, they've been in a lot of close games that they've lost at the end, so I think it's definitely possible that they could win this weekend. And then I don't know. Have you heard how? I've heard Romo could be back in the next couple weeks. I just haven't heard specifically when.
Oh, according to Pete Prisco from CBS Sports, this looks like the last game that they're going to play without Romo. So Matt Castle. Can Matt Castle do enough to beat Jameis Winston? I know Tampa Bay's defense isn't spectacular. No part of Tampa Bay is spectacular, but they still sit there at 3-5. They're not going to be at the top of the draft if they keep playing as well as they have been under Lovie Smith there in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Castle, you never know. I mean, he's had good games. I thought he played pretty well last week, and I mean, you got Des Bryant's a week healthier, so I think anything's possible.
Hey, let's take this thing to a West Coast bias this week, which is talking about all 4:00 p.m. All 4:00 or later p.m. or later Eastern time starts, and let's start with one of the quietest 6-2 teams in NFL history, in the Minnesota Vikings, visiting the 4-4 Oakland Raiders, who look like they are most certainly on their way up, despite a overtime loss to Pittsburgh. Or last second loss to Pittsburgh a week ago.
Yeah, I got to be honest. The Raiders really have impressed me the way they played this year. Looks like they may have finally turned the corner between adding Khalil Mack and now Derek Carr last year, and then adding Amari Cooper this year. They really, I mean, they had it that game. I thought for sure they were going to pull out that game against the Steelers. I mean, it was one Antonio Brown play at the end there. I mean, granted, he did have almost 300 yards receiving that game, so it's kind of funny to say one play, but from going to overtime. So it should be a very interesting game this week. I mean, let's be honest, Bridgewater hasn't played exceptionally well this year. Adrian Peterson's played pretty well. He's not the old Adrian Peterson, but he's better than most of the running backs in the league right now. But it's that defense that's carried them.
I like Carr a lot. I think that he makes everybody around him better. I mean, Michael Crabtree wasn't exactly left for dead, but he's had a decent season. They've been doing it with really no names at running back. I mean, Murray's carried the load pretty well, but there's not really a lot of superstars there. I couldn't name a single one of their offensive linemen without looking at a computer screen. So I'm pretty impressed with the Raiders. I'm pretty impressed with the job that Jack Del Rio has done. Let's keep it in the AFC West. You got the Kansas City Chiefs visiting the Denver Broncos. You remember early in the season, primetime game, the Chiefs really had it in the bag, and Denver inexplicably scored 14 points in like the final minute of the game to pull that out and stay undefeated at that point. They got roughed up by the Indianapolis Colts on the road a week ago. Coming off their big win over the Packers at home. This game in Denver, I like the Chiefs a lot. I think that the Chiefs are a lot better than their 3-5 record. I know you probably don't agree with that, but who do you like in this game before we get into a discussion on the Kansas City Chiefs?
I'm still going to go with the Broncos in this game. I mean, they only have one loss this year. I know their offense hasn't played spectacularly, but I'm really curious to see how they fit in their new weapon at tight end. His name's blanking on me for a minute. Vernon Davis. I'm really curious to see how Peyton Manning uses him. I mean, Peyton Manning has definitely had a very down year by Peyton Manning standards. So it'll be interesting if he can make a big difference on offense or not. I mean, the defense has really carried them all year. They haven't had much of a running game, and Manning's been hit or miss.
I've been very, very unimpressed with the Denver Broncos, with the exception of that game against the Green Bay Packers where their defense stepped up. And then it just disappeared. And Frank Gore had, I told you to write off anybody that played for Butch Davis at Miami in the early 2000s. And, Andre Johnson wasn't really a factor, but you looked at what Luck did. You look at what Frank Gore did. You looked at what the Indianapolis defense ultimately did in that first half. I mean, this game was a little bit closer because of the Omar Bolden punt return that Kansas City, for some reason, allowed to happen. I'm sorry, not Kansas City, but Indianapolis, for some reason, allowed to happen at the end of the half in that game a week ago. I think that Denver is definitely on the downward slide. I think this is a big game for Kansas City. I mean, you don't want to talk about the playoffs of the 3-5 team at the halfway point, but it's a possibility. Kansas City just has to get hot. I don't believe a lot in Alex Smith, but I think that the AFC is weak enough that the Chiefs could slide in there.
Yeah, I mean it's possible. It's possible. I mean they're not a bad team. I just don't think they're anything more than a 500 team, to be honest. So that's I guess that's where I'm getting at with them. And like I've told you before, Alex Smith is more of he's a middling quarterback. He's just I don't think he's a quarterback that's going to take you to the Super Bowl. I mean, obviously they have some injury issues that are going to cause some problems as well. So I just don't. I can't see Alex Smith leading them to the playoffs.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. Who do you like in the AFC? I think that we'd have to concede division championships are going to go to Denver, New England, and the Cincinnati Bengals. Indianapolis is probably going to come out of that decrepit AFC South, but that leaves two teams to work themselves into the wild card spots. Who do you like for those spots?
Right now, for the wild card spots, I gotta go. I mean, the Jets are right there. I mean, they've been up and down, but they've been pretty solid. So I think right now they got to be one of the favorites. And you know what? I'm actually gonna go on the edge and say I think the Raiders may actually pull something out here. I think it's a bit of a reach, but I really like what I've seen from them this year.
I don't dislike the Raiders for that role. I still think that I like the Jets as well. I don't like the Jets, but I like them for that wild card spot. And I look at the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that it's really whoever that second best. I think it's going to come out of the AFC West. So I think we're in a little bit of agreement there. Obviously the Raiders have the upper hand at 4-4 over the Chiefs at 3-5, and I think the Raiders are going to be favored at home against the Vikings, whereas the Chiefs are most definitely going to be underdogs going into Denver. So, nobody's handed anybody a Super Bowl win just yet, but a very familiar pair of teams when it comes to Super Bowls. They're meeting once again. They only meet the regular season every 4 years, and the Patriots have manhandled the rest of the league. But since their Week 17 victory over the Giants at the end of the 2007 season, they haven't achieved victory. I know that this Giants team is a lot different. They're coming in at 5-4. Patriots are 8-0. But the game is in the Meadowlands. New England, you gotta figure they're gonna lose the game at some point. I know they went 16-0 8 years ago, but you can't assume 8-0. And that just seems like a game that if they're gonna lose a game, they should win. It's probably gonna be this one. I can't really explain why, especially after what happened the last time I watched Eli Manning. He's brilliant, and their defense couldn't stop Drew Brees. So, you give the Giants any kind of a shot in this one?
Sure. I mean, the Giants are at home. They're 3-1 at home, so they're definitely a much better home team. Eli Manning's actually, he's played fairly well this year. I'm not going to say he's setting the league on fire, but I think he's played pretty well. Their defense has been inconsistent, but you got Jason Pierre-Paul back, so let's see if he can do anything for them. But they've got a good group of receivers, and I've watched them come back a few times in those fourth quarters this year when I thought they had no chance. And I don't think you can rule out a Tom Coughlin team yet, just based on his track record.
All right, let's bring it back into my neck of the woods. The Arizona Cardinals traveling up to Seattle. They've had limited success up there the last couple of years. Up at CenturyLink Field. The Seahawks, 2 NFC championships in a row. They've pretty much owned the AFC West the last couple of years. The rivalry has changed from Seattle and San Francisco to Seattle and Arizona. Arizona at 6-2, taking on the Seahawks at 4-4. Looking for their flashpoint, looking for that one moment where you could say, okay, that's where Arizona took over the AFC or the NFC Western Division. It's going to be tough going on the road, but you look at the Seattle team, and halfway through they're at 500. Is this a team that you look at as more of a 9-7 team, or could you see them going like 7-1 in the second half and finishing 11-5?
I think they're more of a 9-7 team. It'll depend a lot on their running game. The running game has been up and down all year. Russell Wilson's been fairly solid, and then the defense has been a little bit inconsistent as well, especially for them. But I like the Cardinals in this game. I think the Cardinals are definitely one of the best two teams in the NFC right now from what I've seen. And since they're fairly healthy at this point, I think they're in good shape.
Yeah, get used to seeing the Cardinals under the lights. You're going to see them in that same Sunday night time slot on NBC a week from Sunday when they take on the Cincinnati Bengals back at home in Glendale, Arizona. I think that the Cardinals are definitely on their way. I think that the Packers have shown themselves to be vulnerable, and the Carolina Panthers have every reason.
What a shocking team that is!
Yeah, you have every reason to believe they're going to go to 9-0, taking on Mike Mularkey, who did catch lightning in a bottle with his first win as an interim coach after the dismissal of Ken Wisenhunt. But I'm impressed with Carolina across the board. They were off last week, or they took down the Packers at home. Packers had to go on the road in consecutive weeks, and it didn't work out well for them. But I love that defense in Carolina. I think that that's going to be the Cardinals, public enemy number one. So we'll see how that goes. But, for this week, they have a task in front of them to take on the Seahawks under the lights. They win this game, they're going to run away with the West Division, even though the Rams, could hang around a little bit. I think that, this definitely puts Seattle out of the running. So, speaking of running, we're running out of time. You can catch our podcast. It's called Suits and Laterals at suitsandlaterals.com. You can download us on iTunes. And we've just been added to Stitcher Radio. You can follow us on Twitter. First of all, follow the show on Twitter at Suits Laterals. And Chris is at CGRN731. You can get me, Jeff Rich, at by Jeff Rich. And check us out every week. Find us on iTunes. Just find us however you get your RSS feed. And that's going to do it for Suits and Laterals this week. Chris, do you have any parting thoughts?
Yeah, let's see how many more 8-0 teams. We had another one fall this past week, so let's see if we have any more fall this week, any surprises out there. I don't think they can all go 16-0 this year.
Oh, absolutely not. I think that there's a couple of 4-4 teams that I've got my eye on in the NFC. I've completely dismissed Philadelphia, but they are 4-4. They're right there in the running in the NFC East. And, I mentioned the St. Louis Rams. They're right there at 4-4. They're a team that's a lot better than the record is. That's a team that if I'm an offensive coordinator, I absolutely do not want to play. So, a couple of those early games on Sunday are going to, have some intrigue to them for sure. Not to mention the Cleveland Browns Pittsburgh Steelers game, which is just going to be ugly because you're going to have a battered Josh McCown going out there against a battered Ben Roethlisberger, or
it'll be Landry Jones. It'll be Landry.
It will be Landry Jones. So that'll be ugly. But that's going to do it for Suits and Laterals. For Chris Green, I'm Jeff Rich. We'll see you next week, everyone.